My guest today is Steve Einhorn.
Well, thanks, Tom, for enabling me to participate with your podcast program. And I'm looking forward to speaking and just sharing what I've learned. I've worked on climate change for a dozen years, and I wrote this book called Climate Change, What They Rarely Teach in College. And what the book does is it goes over the real science, what's actually happened in the world, and hopefully it does it in a clear, concise, and relatively interesting way there. So let's talk about the claim. The climate activists have a program. By the way, this is their entire argument. It's very simple. You start with fossil fuels. The fossil fuels burn. When they burn, they generate more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which in turn generates global warming. And global warming is what's causing all of these climate changes. This is their entire argument. There's nothing else. So let's see how accurate this is. And what I think you'll see is there is an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide. There actually is, but I want you to remember two words when you think about it. One is minuscule and the other is minimal. So when someone says that atmospheric carbon dioxide is causing global warming, you add, yes, it's true, and the influence is minuscule or minimal, okay? So now let's go on to the next slide. Let's start out with what are actually climatic events, real climatic events. Hurricanes are real events. There's been no increase in hurricanes or cyclones for 50 years. This is according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. If you see this thin blue line that's going upward, that's carbon dioxide. Every year we have more carbon dioxide, almost every year. And as far as hurricanes, the number of major hurricanes and all hurricanes has not gone anywhere. Look at these squiggly lines, these light bluish lines. They're not going anywhere. There hasn't been any change for the past 45 years. That's according to the government. This isn't me saying it. This is the government telling you that there's been no increase in hurricanes. Now, what they claim, since there's no increase in hurricanes, is the activists claim, oh, but in the North Atlantic, there's an increase in concentration, and they're more intense than they ever were. My Lord. And they're talking about 2 or 3% or something like that. But what they forget to tell you is that in the Pacific Ocean, it's exactly the opposite. There's actually been less concentration of hurricanes. And so is the claim of the activists that climate change caused by carbon dioxide is increasing the intensity in the Atlantic and decreasing the intensity in the Pacific? That really doesn't make a lot of sense. How about tornado, right? Tornadoes are important. Well, here's a slide that shows tornadoes for the last 75 years. See the red line? Red line, carbon dioxide. And what's the blue line? Those blue lines are the number of major tornadoes. They've gone nowhere. There's been no increase since 1954 there. How about another one? How about acreage has burned? How many acres have actually burned? Well, we keep hearing every day, huge fires, more fires, all caused by carbon dioxide, all caused by fossil fuels. Well, this is from the National Intergovernmental Fire Center, another division of the government. See the blue line? Yep, same thing. Carbon dioxide goes up almost every year. What about fires? The acres burned decreases. Oh, that's the red line. Gone down a lot. And since 1970, it's been relatively low. Okay. How about the number of forest fires? This is also from the National Interagency Fire Center and also the Forest Service. And you can see that there's been no change whatsoever in the number of forest fires. So these are the major events. There's another comment that I'd like to make about forest fires. Humans are causing 80% of the forest fires. We know that from the government. Smokey's been telling us since before we were born that only you can prevent forest fires because humans could control and cause through carelessness or arson or just humanity being there 80% of forest fires. And if it's the case that you're in the midst of where there is real civilization, 97% of all forest fires are caused by humans. So it doesn't make any sense to blame this on any other issue, including fossil fuels. Let's talk about droughts. Look at the orange. The orange shows the number of droughts during the past 135 years. There's been no increase whatsoever. Nothing. Again. Okay. So what have we now seen? We've covered the great majority of all major climate events: hurricanes, tornadoes, forest fires, number of forest fires, droughts. There's been no change. What have all these carbon dioxide molecules been doing? Why isn't fossil fuels, coal, gas, and oil, why aren't they more effective in generating global warming? And the reason is because they don't generate most of the radiant heat in the world, and we can go over that very shortly. So I wanted to go over what's happened in terms of heat and temperature warmth during the past, during our lifetimes. Let's start out with 2016 to 2022. 2016 was a warm year. And after that, as you can see from these squiggly lines, that 2022, the time between 2016 and 2022, there's been no increase in the average temperature on Earth. Just nothing there. And this comes from HADCRA 4, which is basically the English government year. They've been doing this for many, many years there. So what happened? What were these carbon dioxide molecules doing for these 7 years? Because there was no increase whatsoever. In fact, there was a decrease since 2016. Let's talk about from 1998. 1998 was a very warm year. But you can see from this chart that between 1998 and 2015, all temperatures were lower. This was a very big problem. It was a very big problem for the activists, because by 2008, 9, and 10, they'd gone 10 years and there'd been no increase. In fact, it was lower than 1998. So what do? You're claiming that there's global warming, but there's no global warming. You go to a PR agency called Meslansky in Michigan there. And Meslansky says, we can help you. So how do they help? They do a study and they find out that if you use climate change, now it's much, much easier to claim that there's a problem. And you can see that. Look, global warming you can measure. It's either warmer or it isn't. Climate change, that's really vague. What does it mean there? We know it's warmer in the summer than the winter, but what else does climate change mean? Right now, it means virtually everything that the activists want to tell us about. And that's why we use climate change now, and you rarely hear about global warming separately there. Why do we have warm years and cold years? You've seen how 2016 was a warm year. If you look at these red lines here going up and down, you see that 2016 was warm, you see that 1998 was warm, and you see that 2023 was warm. Well, one major reason relates to El Nino. Okay. What is El Nino? El Nino is when the winds come from the South Pacific and they hit the top of the waves and they bring the heat from those waves and they go around the world and the world heats up. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. The fishermen off of the South Pacific learned this in 1800, that every several years it was warmer. And this is just what happens on Earth. There's a cycle here, and we have El Nino. And this is one reason why 2023 was a warm year. But there's more. This is a chart that shows a little bit more detail of why it was a warm year in 2023. In addition to El Nino, there are sunspots. When there are more sunspots, the world is warmer. It's that simple. If there are less sunspots, it's cooler. Well, 2023 has a lot of sunspots. That's the orange here. And you can see that the orange is a bit high for 2023. This has nothing to do with oil, gas, or coal. Okay. Let's talk about extremes. We're told that there are extremes all the time now of heat and whatever. Well, this is a chart from the EPA. And what it shows is that the hottest, the most heat waves that we ever had were in the 1930s. And in fact, I live in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin had the highest temperature ever in 1936 in July, 114 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is a chart that shows that almost 100 years ago, before virtually any of us were born, was actually when we had the most extreme heat and heat waves. This chart is no longer available on the internet. The EPA removed it, and they removed it because they didn't want us to see it. It didn't hit with their ideas of what we should know. This is a very complicated chart by Nir Shaviv. He's with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and what he studies is thermal radiation. And what the chart shows is that the sun produces 99% of all thermal radiation on Earth. And CO2 is about 0.5%. It's truly meaningless. Remember, minuscule and minimal. That's the influence of CO2. Willie Soon from the Harvard Astrophysical Lab has measured and compared the sun spots and temperature on Earth, and you can see the blue is the temperature, and the orange are the sunspots. They mirror each other to a large extent, but which shows how important the sun really is in terms of determining temperature on Earth. Let's go to CO2. We've talked about CO2 having a minimal effect, but we should really start with Al Gore. Al Gore is important, and his book, An Inconvenient Truth, is important. It's the most important book ever written on the environment because it sold more copies. He's had a movie, and he promotes it everywhere. What does he say in his book? Of all the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide usually gets top billing because it accounts for about 80% of total greenhouse gases. That's from his book. But what's the truth? Truth is that in terms of molecules, water vapor is 95% of all greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide's under 4%. Well, guess what? Two words don't appear in Al Gore's book. Water vapor. Yeah, not there. Why not? Is he trying to convince us of something that isn't true, or just doesn't he know any better? Well, one of the two, probably. Here's another period of time, 32 years. And for 32 years between 1944 and 1976, it cooled. Once again, you see the blue line coming up, carbon dioxide, and you see the squiggly red lines going nowhere up. It's actually gradually becoming cooler. In 1976, these same activists who were claiming that we're going to all suffer from heat were claiming we were going to have a cold spell and go back to the ice ages very, very shortly, and we should worry about that. These climate activists, one of their main goals is we should worry. And this is an example of how they told us it was going to get cold and we're going to freeze when it didn't there. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about COVID because this is something that's happened within the very recent past. And COVID affected us greatly in 2020. Remember what happened? We didn't go to work. We didn't go to school. We didn't drive. We didn't fly. And we actually reduced all fossil fuels by 10%. This was the greatest experiment in American history in actually reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It was the largest fossil fuel experiment in history. And what did we have? We had a warm year, exactly the opposite of what was predicted. And what happened in 2021? We started going back to school, to work, planes flew, we drove. And the year became cooler as we were using more fossil fuels. Beyond Lombard has calculated that this 10% fossil fuel reduction due to our COVID policies had virtually no effect on global warming. 1/500th of a degree centigrade. Can you imagine? It's amazing they actually could calculate it. It is so small and such a low impact there. And by the way, you should know that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is actually logarithmic. And what that means is that every additional molecule generates less heat than the previous one. And of course, we need carbon dioxide. We breathe it out. The plants take it in. They absorb the carbon dioxide. They breathe out oxygen. That's how we get a lot of the oxygen we need to breathe. And the more carbon dioxide, the better the plants grow, as you can see from this diagram. Let's talk about the sea rise, because that's another issue. This is probably what people worry about the most, that the sea is going to rise and we're all going to be underwater shortly. There. So Al Gore made a prediction that within the near term, the seas would rise by 20 feet. That's a lot, right? But what actually happened? And according to NASA, the sea rose 2 inches. Al was wrong. He was 100 times wrong. How can you be 100 times wrong if you're following science? You have to have a very big hypothesis. Let's look specifically. This is New York. And what you see here is no acceleration. This is a chart which shows acceleration at New York City. There's none. That means that the seas are not increasing at an increasing rate. They're just increasing, and they're increasing at the same rate. That's what this chart shows. The seas outside of New York are rising about 3 millimeters a year, which is 1 inch every 8 years. And you can see it's relatively constant. This is from the NOAA again. So these are all coming from your government. And so what the government does is they do these studies which show that there's no problem, and then they predict that there's a problem in the future. So we have to spend a lot of money and get everybody upset. This is Los Angeles. Los Angeles the water outside of Los Angeles is increasing at 1 millimeter a year. That means a foot every 300 years. And yet we're told that Los Angeles is going to fall into the ocean because the ocean is going to rise up and destroy the western portion of California. Well, what is happening in the world as a whole, not only the US, if we look at the 7 largest cities that are on the sea, Tokyo, New York, Los Angeles, Buenos Aires, Mumbai, Shanghai, and Calcutta, the picture is the same. There's a constant rate at every city. It's between 1 millimeters and 4 millimeters per year. That's how much the seas are rising. But what about the UN? The UN, according to the activists, is the leading authority on sea rise in the world. They know more about sea rise than anybody else. And they are more effective in getting their message across than anybody else, which is why the Paris Agreement and the Green New Deal are basically, to a large extent, based upon the UN IPCC. Well, look at this red line. It's going up. In 1900, the UN IPCC, according to its latest report, had that the average sea was rising at 1.3 millimeters a year. And then it multiplied 3 times to where it is now, to about 3.7 millimeters per year. And it's going to multiply another 3 times between now and 2050 or 2100. Okay. Where do they get this from? They get this from measuring glaciers and polar caps and atmospheric pressure, and add a human factor of what we're causing. Before you know it, you end up with this sort of chart. The blue, by the way, is the actual historical. There's been no acceleration. Right? Okay. So why is this important? It's important because it shows the problems that we have with the activist. This is the major disagreement. These alarmists use computer models that incorporate many uncertain values and even outright guesses. And I call the others the realists because we're looking at history. We forecast a continuation of past trends. And there's the chart, as you saw from 2016, based upon past trends. So I'm going to read that again, because this is the basis of the argument, guys, right? Alarmists are using computer models that incorporate many uncertain values and guesses, and the realists are forecasting a continuation of past trends. This is extremely important for you to understand, and it's very easy to understand, and this is why virtually all of their projections are wrong. Now let's talk about polar bears. Isn't it almost every day we're told the polar bears are going to become extinct? And there's a solution. And the solution for the polar bears going extinct is that you should give money to these activist organizations, which are going to help the polar bear. And what's the polar bear's problem? You're told they're floating on small ice packs like this. They're drowning. They can't get to the walruses. It's terrible. But let's look at history and see what really happened. It's true. The polar bears were going extinct. And why were they going extinct? Because they were getting shot. And they were getting shot because polar bear fur is beautiful. It makes wonderful rugs. But in the 1970s, they decided this is not a good idea. Let's stop shooting the polar bears. So the polar bears have affirmative action right now. You're not allowed to shoot a polar bear. And as a result, look what's happened. That's the chart on the right. The actual number of polar bears has increased from about 10,000 to about 30,000. They're doing fine. The polar bears don't need your help. They don't need your money. So just be grateful that these beautiful animals are doing fine without our help. Another matter that we're told about is the coral reefs. They're going to basically lose all of their colors. That's what's going to happen with the coral reefs. And the reason for this is because the temperatures of the water are so high and the pH is lowering and the combination is destroying their colors. And they're all going to be pale, egg, like yellow, whatever. Well, this was actually happening in Palau. Palau is a country that's very close to the equator, north of Australia in the Pacific Ocean. And Palau had exactly this problem where the corals were losing their color. So what did they do? They did two things. First, they eliminated the visitors from using suntan lotion. No more suntan lotion of certain types because they had chemicals that were killing these things or hurting them dramatically. And the other is they stopped dropping refuse into the ocean. The net effect is what you see here. This is a picture of Palau's coral reefs. And where did this come from? This came from an article which showed what happened and explained if in 2000, there were virtually no colors and now they're beautiful again. But in the article, it read, of course, there is significant human-caused global warming and human-caused climate change. You have to do that if you're going to print an article in the United States these days, because otherwise it won't be printed and you'll certainly never get any money from the government for citing something like this here. And as you probably know, the Great Barrier Reef, which is the major coral reef in the world, in Australia, is doing very well now. Ever since the farmers stopped depositing their residue from their farms, which were sugar farms. We're going to give Al Gore one more chance. He made a prediction in his book. This is a picture from his book of 16 animals that he claimed were going to go extinct. And let's see what happened. He was wrong on all 16 because none of them have gone extinct since he wrote his book. And here's one. Here's the Hawaiian tree frog. Okay. What happened with the Hawaiian tree frog? Well, there are up to 20,000 per acre in Hawaii. It's a major problem. And if Al Gore wants to know what we should do about it, he should call pest control in Hawaii and he'll find his response. Gore was right about one animal that did go extinct. It was the golden toad. And he got it right that it was going extinct, but his timing was bad because the golden toad became extinct 20 years before he wrote his book. And it died of a virus. It had nothing whatever to do with global warming. So we have to go over another, the harmful health effects of carbon dioxide. And the global warming. Burning fossil fuels creates harmful air pollution that can worsen heart disease, according to Yale. Okay? And this comes out every day, how this is hurting our health. But let's just look at heart disease as an example. This is a map of the United States showing ozone and particles. That is basically pollution. And as you can see, Los Angeles has basically the most pollution of any city in the country by a lot. It has had 1,000 days over the past 10 years, which are considered to be pollution days. So how is Los Angeles doing in terms of heart disease? It turns out that the average deaths from heart disease is 200 per 100,000 people. And Los Angeles is actually lower. They're at 190 per 200,000 people. So clearly, the air pollution is not having much of an effect. And as you know, the EPA has worked with us. We have the Clean Air Act, and we've eliminated 80% of all pollution in the air over the past 60 years. So there is no problem in the United States. That doesn't mean there isn't a problem elsewhere. So let's go into predictions. We have the Paris Agreement. Every day we are told that if the Earth becomes 1 degree centigrade hotter, this is going to cause a climate change disaster and catastrophe. It's not identified exactly what it is, but we're going to have a climate change and catastrophe. And the goal, of course, is that we must have a zero increase in atmospheric CO2, which means a great elimination of almost all fossil fuels. Okay. So what the Paris Agreement tells us is because of this 1 degree increase, which is going to cause climate change, our lifespans are going to decrease, poverty is going to increase, literacy is going to decrease, and wealth is going to decrease. Okay. Now, you know that during the past 100, 150 years, the Earth has increased by 1 or 2 degrees. That's just how it is. It's warm. It's been a warm period for the Earth, and so it's gotten warmer. How has this warmth affected the same issues that I just read to you about? Well, since 1840, lifespan has increased 20 years. Okay, so while we have more carbon dioxide in the air, we have longer lives. Poverty's decreased from 55 to 20% in the last 40 years. Literacy has increased from 20 to 80% during the past couple hundred years. Wealth has increased 70 times since 1900. Okay. In other words, the Paris Agreement totally contradicts history. There is no justification based on history to think that anything they've told us about the future is correct. Because we know the lifespans have increased, the poverty has decreased, literacy has increased, wealth has increased. And that based upon historical science, the Paris Agreement claims there is no validity. They're all false. There's no basis for them. Now, the activists have a number of ways of getting their way or kind of convincing us. One of the most effective ways is language distortion. They mix up weather and climate, right? We know, here's the definition, weather, the state of the atmosphere at a particular time and place. That's one time, one place, one event. Climate, the usual weather conditions over a period of years. Comes right from the dictionary. By the way, every dictionary has the same definition. But what happened? You have Hurricane Katrina. And how do you read it in the paper? This is proof of climate change. But it's not proof of climate change. It's an individual weather event, and so is every one of them. And as you see in the aggregate, there's been no change. Greta Thunberg is the single most effective speaker to get us to have climate anxiety. Fear, intimidation, and guilt. That's what she presents us. Around the year 2030, we will set off an irreversible chain reaction beyond our control that will most likely lead to catastrophe. Our lives are in your hands. How dare you to continue to look away from global warming and come here saying that you are doing enough? Your generation is failing us. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. What type of argument is this? Is this a legal argument? Is it a scientific argument? No. This is what a 4-year-old child says to mom and dad. Mom and dad, if you don't let me have ice cream now, I am never going to speak with you. It's the same logic. And Greta is brilliant at getting this across. She's a very wealthy young lady now. She has 2 million followers, but they're all following a wrong influence. So what's the problem? This is a real problem. Climate anxiety. There are millions of people now who are not getting married because of their fears of climate change. There are millions who are not having children because they don't want to bring up a world of such potential disaster and catastrophe. And here it is. Here's the UN prediction of over 100 predicted models. That's the red line. The blue line is what actually happened. And as a result, the UN is, their claims are 3 times what reality is. 3 times the increase in temperature that has actually occurred. But this is what we follow in terms of our government policy. Let's talk about the Green New Deal. Right now, we have actually 34 trillion now of debt. And in the Green New Deal, there's up to 20% has anything to do with climate. And that's the grid, transportation, and housing. It's over 75% has to do with nothing related to climate change. These are jobs for everyone, healthcare, and free food, basically. But it totals 70 trillion, which will certainly bankrupt us if we ever implemented it. But the other part, which is very important, has to do with our freedoms and liberty. These policies are strong socialistic policies, which we can get to separately. But right now, let's just talk about the freedoms and liberty. If you go to any liberal college, there will be virtually no viewpoint diversity. In other words, virtually anything that I am telling you today will not be spoken about at university, and you will be intimidated to say them because it is settled science. Virtually everything that you've seen here, which is science from the government mostly, is not true. How about the government has mandated what cars we're going to be allowed to buy? You know, that's the case. Do we really want to have the freedom to pick the cars we want? Virtually all current appliances are going to be prohibited for sale. And of course, the military is focusing on electric vehicles. These are going to be very competitive against the fossil fuel vehicles that our opponents will have. There is a major reason for not using fossil fuels or for reducing fossil fuels, and that is they're limited. We only have somewhere between 100 and 200 years of fossil fuels. That's all there is, guys, especially if we continue at this rate. And so what we need is technology to reduce fossil fuels. And this is an example here. This is a liquid-cooled computer. And what liquid-cooled computers can do is save 3% of all the energy we have in the world, because these computers can be used in data centers. And data centers are currently using 3 or 4% of the energy in the world, and they're going to be using double that within 10 years. But we can cut that down by 80% by using liquid cooled computers there, because they don't need air conditioning, and they don't need chillers, and that you can recover the heat from many of them to actually use for hot water or heating buildings, and thereby save a lot of energy. So here's why we should all be happy. There is no global warming problem. There's no climate change problem. And what we should be doing is concentrating on the realization of worthy goals and happiness. We are blessed with a wonderful climate. Thank God. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Steve. Do you have any comments to make on wind and solar energy, green energy in general?
Yes, I'd like to talk about electric vehicles and wind and solar energy. We've been told that Tesla and the electric vehicles are the solution to the future. And they're going to save all types of energy. But the truth is exactly the opposite. To make a medium-sized Tesla or electric vehicle, you have to mine 500,000 pounds of earth. And that means it's going to take about 8 years to break even. We've also spent $500 billion in the Deficit Reduction Act on this. So what's happened so far? Well, the average car that's electric is 4 years old. And it's going to take 8 years to break even, which means that we haven't saved 1 ounce of energy through our program of spending $500 billion, and it's going up. It'll be $1 trillion by the time we're done supporting this. I have no objection. We shouldn't have any objection to selling electric vehicles or Teslas, provided it's not on a competitive basis using capitalism, but under the current socialist method of reimbursing owners. And who are you reimbursing? You're reimbursing the wealthiest people in the country. Poor people don't buy Teslas, which average $60,000. So we're actually transferring wealth to wealthy people. And then, of course, we have these charges which have to be paid for by the government, which is really us, that are also not competitively priced. Solar panels. Well, no objection, once again, if solar panels are being sold on a competitive capitalist basis, but that's not what's happening. And solar panels are going to cause a lot of trouble, because these worn out panels are going to double all plastic waste within 30 years, 35 years. And the other part is environmentally. These are terrible for the birds and the bats. They ignite these birds in smoke, in a puff of smoke. And the solar and wind together are killing well over 1 million birds and bats a year. Here are wind farms. These are not totally environmentally friendly. They're using 80,000 tons of iron ore and cement. And what do the wind farms do? They slice off the wings of the birds. Terrible way to die. Anyway, those are my comments on the wind and solar and electric vehicles, Tom.
Okay, very good. Did you want to mention a little more about the book that you published about climate change?
Yeah. Well, thank you. When I wrote the book, I wanted it to be very simple and clear, because you can make the science very complicated and difficult and boring, and I didn't want to do that. There is a portion of humor in the book, and it's very informal and very simple for understanding, because the concepts are basically very simple. They're very simple. Fossil fuels do generate a minimal amount of carbon dioxide. And this is verified throughout the book. What you might want to do if you do buy the book, which is here, you might want to use it as a reference, because it does have 800 footnotes. And so if anyone objects to anything in there, you can go and cite the original reference and then determine what's there. It does also cover most of the topics that are important relating to climate change now. And so I wanted to encourage you to buy the book, or it's available on Amazon, or it's Kindle. It's $20 for the book or $10 a Kindle. I appreciate your considering buying the book, but I hope that you've enjoyed my speech and that it had some value for you. Thanks.
Very good. And actually, one more follow-up question is, have you given similar presentations like this in the real world, and how has that gone, if you have?
During the past year, I've spoken about a dozen times, and I think my presentation's getting better. You always learn as you do these things. I've spoken at several colleges, Michigan State, Michigan, Hillsdale, Maranatha, and some high schools and business groups there, and I'm happy to do so, either by Zoom or in person. When I'm through, what is happening now is there are virtually no questions, which is really surprising to me. But I think the reason is that I'm covering almost every issue related to climate change that has been deemed to be important. And there is no rebuttal to it. And there's no rebuttal because all I've done is share the science, the real science. And the science is coming from the government. So if they want to argue against what I'm saying, they have to say that the government is wrong in their studies of sea level and temperature and hurricanes and tornadoes, and it doesn't work. But eventually, the truth will out.
Okay, very good. I really appreciate all you're doing here. I think your content is excellent, and I hope to have you on again sometime. Steve Einhorn, thank you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciated it.